That's scary. Do you need a voice check?
Go ahead.
I'm not ready.
Tonight is the evening of July 6, 1944, and General Eisenhower is addressing the International Press Corps that has been flown across the English Channel for this exclusive press conference. This is Eisenhower's first public comments on the June 6th D-Day invasion, Operation Overlord, and of its success. Operation Overlord was the greatest amphibious operation the world has ever seen. A truly staggering feat of logistics that involved putting ashore on the Normandy beaches a total of 176,475 men, 3,000 artillery pieces, 1,500 tanks, and 15,000 assorted vehicles. Close to 8,000 fighting ships, merchant ships, and assault crafts were committed to the entire invasion force, along with 10,500 air sorties. Allied commanders secretly predicted to Eisenhower that as many as 12,000 men could be killed in the first 24 hours of the landings, the longest day, and that the invasion could be pushed back into the sea. Thankfully, they were overly pessimistic. Fewer than 6,600 American soldiers were killed on D-Day, with the total casualties for the Allies at 8,422. The Germans lost over 9,000 soldiers killed in 24 hours. This successful invasion was in part due to the highly intricate Allied deception plans and the breaking of the Enigma Code that led Hitler and his military staff to believe the invasion would be at Pas de Calais, the narrowest point between England and France. The D-Day landings were the beginning of the end of Hitler's Third Reich and the reign of terror for Europe. And now, General Eisenhower.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank the press for coming over from England. I hope and pray that all of you had a safe trip. I believe most of you flew in from London here on the beaches of Normandy. I think some of you came in from the Portsmouth area. There's a couple of things I'd like to ask before we begin the press conference. Number one, I ask that you stay with your MPs. Well, we're only about 25 kilometers from the front lines at this point. And there's still German sharpshooters in the area, and I would not want to see you go back to England in a body bag. So please stay with your MPs at all time. I believe most of you have 2 MPs assigned to your group, and most of the groups are made up of 10 or 15 press corps. You're from all over the world. I'm glad you are here. This, of course, are my first remarks. 4 weeks ago on June the 6th, 1944, when we successfully broke through the 3,475-mile Atlantic Wall that Adolf Hitler said the Allies would never be able to break. And we broke it. And we now are marching on our way to Paris. Hopefully by Christmas, the war will be over. That's what we're hoping for. We are making slow progress through the hedgerows in southern France, but eventually, hopefully, we'll be in Paris very soon. And then, hopefully, prayerfully, we can get our troops back home. I want to personally thank, at this point, President Roosevelt. As you know, on the morning of D-Day, President Roosevelt went on radio and gave to us a sterling prayer of protection of all our soldiers. I also want to thank the American people. Word has come back to me that the churches were packed on June the 5th and June the 6th. Thousands upon thousands of individuals in America praying for our troops as we began the invasion, and we do appreciate that here in the military. I'd like to also send my regards to all of you. General Bradley is saying hi to you. General Patton right now is indisposed, and we hope he keeps his mouth shut. At this point, we're trying to keep him in the background. But General Montgomery also sends his respects to the press corps. Well, let's begin. 4 years ago, 1940, we were a third-rate military power in the world. At any given point, we could only place on any given battlefield approximately 75,000 men. As you know, every time there's a major war like World War I, right after the war, what is the first thing Congress does and the Senate? They cut back the military. That's exactly what they did. They cut the Marines, they cut the Army Air Force, the Navy, and every branch they cut back, they cut back, they cut back. The Japanese saw this, the Germans saw this. This is something you cannot do. You always have to maintain a sense of power before your enemies. You cannot appease your enemies, and when you begin to appease your enemies, you're going to have problems. A good example of that would be Prime Minister Chamberlain. He spent 2 days with Adolf Hitler, 2 days in Berlin, talking to Hitler. Hitler promised not to invade Poland. He promised not to invade the lowlands. And he signed a paper, and if you can remember, as a press corps, you were probably there in London when he flew in, he gets off the airplane, he flaps that piece of paper. What does he say? Peace in our time. Hitler's not going to do anything. What happened the very next week? Hitler invades Poland. Then he begins to invade France, and then the lowlands. And the rest is history. Up until June the 6th, 1944, Hitler controlled all of Europe, every aspect of it. But it wasn't until June the 6th, precisely at 0630 hours, when we hit those beaches, that the beginning of the end for Adolf Hitler began. In 1940, because of the cutbacks in the military, basically we were impotent in every part of the world. The Japanese saw this, and I don't know where you were as a press corps on December the 7th, 1941, precisely at 0730 hours, the Empire of Japan maliciously attacked our Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. Approximately 2 hours later, we lost basically every major battleship that we had. And only by the grace of God did our 2 aircraft carriers leave Pearl Harbor approximately an hour before the Japanese attacked, or we would not even have 2 aircraft carriers. Sorrowfully, we lost 3,725 men were killed because of the bombings of the Japanese. I encouraged the military at that time to begin training, but I felt in my heart that it was a little bit too late to take on the Japanese and the Germans at the same time. On December the 14th, I was called into the War Department. At the War Department was President Roosevelt. We had just received a telegram from Prime Minister Stalin of Russia and also Prime Minister of England, realizing that we had to do something immediately or we were in trouble. As I approached General George Marshall, Joint Chiefs of Staff at the War Department, General Marshall basically said to me, Eisenhower, if we cannot stop the Germans or the Japanese, your grandchildren will be speaking German. At that point, Americans were not aware that the SS had already invaded Mexico. Not too far from the Texas border, they were setting up camps. People were not aware of that. People were not aware at that time that the Japanese had plans to invade Alaska. They had already starting to send balloons over California with time bombs on them. Most Americans were not aware of this. If we had known at that point of the buildup of the Wehrmacht in Mexico, or the buildup even before Pearl Harbor of the Japanese thinking about invading Alaska, things might have been a little different. And now we know that there were U-boats off the coast of the United States, many within Manhattan Harbor, not too far from the Statue of Liberty, German U-boats. So all this was planned in advance, and we were now just waking up. At that meeting with Roosevelt, we had two enemies, the Japanese and the Germans. Both of them bent on our destruction. Do we understand, Press Corps? Our destruction, world dominance. We did not have the money, we did not have the manpower, we did not have the artillery or the weapons to take on both at the same time. We had to make a decision. We decided we will take Germany on first, and then the Japanese, with the full force of our military. Now, there were three reasons why we decided to take on Germany first. Reason number one, the U-2 and U-3 system that Germany had in bombing England. We know in 1940, all the way into 1941, England was being bombarded every single night. London especially, but also places like Portsmouth. The V-1 and the V-2 programs of the Germans, realizing now we know now, they had already been working with jet engines, far from what we could even begin to understand at that point. You have to realize that a V-1 or a V-2 bomb missile coming in from France carried a 500-pound bomb with a timer on it. And they would basically, the timer would be set. They had that all figured out, calculated out exactly at certain places in London. And as it started to descend, the 500-pound bomb would go off above your head, almost like 88s, where you have shrapnel everywhere. So the first, probably the number one reason we decided to take on Germany first was because of their program with jet engines, their military expertise, and the buildup of their armies. Number two, the Atlantic Wall. The Atlantic Wall all the way from Spain, all the way up to Holland, all the way up into Norway and Sweden. Over 1.5 million mines laid by the Germans. Over 88,000 pillboxes. In fact, it was so imperative that Hitler build and construct that Atlantic Wall to keep us from the invasion of Europe that he placed his number one field marshal, Rommel, in charge of this. Now, Rommel left Africa in disgrace, and Hitler realized that. And so the German Wehrmacht, which is the army, had to somehow puff him up, place him in an important role so that he could regain his status in the eyes of the German people. So Adolf Hitler placed Rommel in control of the whole plan of the Atlantic Wall, the invasion of Europe, which was probably very up front in Hitler's mind. Number three, at that point, and we still don't know completely, I will be honest with the press, people are disappearing every day in Europe. African Americans, whole families disappearing. Gypsies disappearing. Homosexuals disappearing. Jews, whole families. One night they're there, the next day they're gone. Jehovah's Witness, Conservative Baptist, Conservative Catholics. All these groups were disappearing and nobody knows where they're going. Because at that time, nobody really understood, as we do now, of the concentration camps and of the death camps. We know now that the first concentration camp was 1938, Dachau. And we know that was the beginning of what they call the final solution that we're aware of now for anybody that does not fit into the white Aryan race. So that was the third reason we decided to take on Germany, to get into Europe, break the Atlantic Wall, and establish what is going on, that all these families are disappearing. Although I will say this, it did my heart good to see Jesse Owens in the 1938 Olympics take on the Aryan race, the German athletics, and embarrass them to such a degree that Adolf Hitler got so mad when Jesse Owens beat his white supremacist race in the long jump, in the 50 meter, in the 100 meter, and it really humiliated Hitler and the German army, and that really did me good to see Jesse Owens. By the way, I think Jesse Owens, am I correct? You may not know this, I think he's from Ohio State, in the state of Ohio, but I'm really not sure. But I do know one thing, he was not a favorite of Adolf Hitler when those Olympics were all done. So what do? We take on Germany. We're not prepared. As we left that meeting on December the 14th at the War Department, George Marshall called me aside, said, "You're going to have to come up with a plan. And it's going to take probably 2 years to bring this plan together. You're going to have to cross the English Channel. You're going to have to take on 300 or 400 yard beaches, and you will be up against the might of the Wehrmacht, especially the Waffen SS, because at that time the Waffen SS controlled the beaches of Normandy. But first of all, we thought we needed to do something to distract from Europe. And so I was given the command to take on Operation Torch. Operation Torch, of course, was the invasion of Africa, North Africa. And then from North Africa to Sicily, from Sicily, Italy, and head right on up that way. We were very victorious in North Africa, as you well know. Obviously, that was the area, I think it was Sicily, that General Patton did another doo-doo, and he slapped those 2 privates, which I probably commend him on that because they were cowards. But General Marshall and the President of the United States took me aside basically through various means and said, "General Eisenhower, you got to do something about that man." And so that's why, if you noticed, General Patton was not involved on D-Day. And we set up a secret army, I think it was the First Army, and put him in charge of the non-existent phantom First Army at that point. And we'll talk a little more about that later. My main concern when we had our victory in North Africa and our victory in Sicily and in southern Italy, now we had to turn our eyes on the invasion of Europe, and this was not going to be easy. Not easy at all. London had spies everywhere. If Hitler and his cronies would have found out exactly when we were going to invade Fortress Europe, it would have been a disaster. Thousands of men would have died, and we would probably have had to start all over again in our plans of the invasion. On Christmas of 1943, as you can remember, I flew into London. It was so foggy, you couldn't even see in front of you. And my Jeep driver, fortunately, Kay Summersby, knew London, and so she could basically drive around London in pitch dark and drive me to my headquarters. It was there that I met, of course, General Brooke, General Montgomery, and some of the other generals that I would be working with over the next 6 months in preparation for the invasion. As a press corps, do you realize what was in store here? Do you understand as a press corps what we were doing? I mean, if this failed, do you understand? If it failed, the possibilities would be unimaginable with the Nazis. The first thing that Winston Churchill took me aside, he always blew smoke in my face with this cigar. He always had a cigar in his mouth. Are you familiar? I think probably some of you have interviewed Winston Churchill. Did you get smoke in your face? he gets in your space, and then he'll take a puff of a cigar and blow it right in your face. And he took me aside and said, Ike, he called me Ike, he said, we're going to have to come up with a roost, a red herring. You know what a red herring is? We've got to have a red herring. And he said, politicians are good at red herrings. Politicians are good at lying. They all lie. And whoever can tell the best lie, a convincing lie, will get away with it. We need a lie. We need a red herring. We need something that will take Hitler and the brass off of Normandy and bring it over to another area. That way, we will save lives and possibly be successful in our landing. How do you do this? Well, Winston Churchill, being the politician and the liar that he is, came up with a really good red herring. We went down to the morgue in London, plenty of bodies. And we came across the body of a 25-year-old man who had been killed a couple of days earlier in the bombings of London, and didn't have too many marks on his body. And we brought him back to my office. We cleared my desk. We placed the cadaver on my desk. We dressed him in a second lieutenant's uniform. We took handcuffs on his right hand, which was customary, and then at the other end of the handcuffs, an attaché waterproof case. In the waterproof case, I placed all my military plans for the invasion of Fortress Europe. Dates, places, times, all signed by me, my signature. Wrong place, wrong time. Hitler knew that if we were going to cross the English Channel, it would not be 60 miles from Portsmouth to Normandy. It probably would be Calais, which is only 16 navigable miles from the White Cliffs of Dover, the shortest route to France. That's what they thought. That's what we had to make them think. And so in this cadaver, we placed him in what we call an X-submarine. Now, you're not familiar with X-submarines. They're very short, it's a two-man submarine, and they do have two chutes, torpedo chutes in them. And we knew of the U-boat alley. Do you know what a U-boat alley is? That's where the submarines, the German submarines, go back and forth. And we knew exactly how they traveled. So we took this cadaver and we placed him in a torpedo tube. And we probably went about a half mile off the coast of Spain, right in U-boat alley. We shot him out of the torpedo tube. Bodies float. His body floated to the top. Now we know from our double spies in Berlin, and we also know from the French underground, that within a week, those plans were on the desk of Adolf Hitler in the high command. Through the Enigma code, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, we realized that now we saw some military changes with the Waffen-SS. He started to move regiments from Normandy up to Calais. But more important than the Waffen-SS, which are the fierce German fighters, he started to move tank divisions. 3 major tank divisions. The one, of course, is called Adolf Hitler. And the Adolf Hitler tank division probably was one of the most supreme at that time of the Tiger tanks, moved from the beaches of Normandy all the way to Calais. So now we're seeing shifts in infantry and shifts in artillery and shifts in, of course, armament. So we knew through the breaking of the German Enigma code that they took it hook, line, and sinker. But we still have to land on those beaches. And the Waffen-SS, although it was now up at Calais, was replaced by 60-year-old men, 12 and 13, 14-year-old boys. That would be the German youth. And but they still you get a 14-year-old boy with an 88 or a 50 caliber machine gun can still do damage to troops. So it really didn't matter the age. But the cracked Waffen SS troops were now gone. But we still had to face those left, which were 3 brigades there on the beaches. The German Enigma Code. In 1942, a man by the name of Alan Turing, prior, probably around 1941, they started to investigate the Enigma Code. Now, the machine itself was found on a U-boat and brought back to Blechy Field. Blechy Field was not too far from London. There were approximately 300 wrens. A wren, of course, would be, and only females could be wrens, would help decipher thousands upon thousands of German messages coming in. But at that time, even the wrens could not fully decipher, even if they could speak German, which most of the wrens could speak fluent German, could not decipher the codes coming in. Because all the codes coming in to Blechy Field basically were through the Enigma machine. Chances of deciphering that, Adolf Hitler said, would be 1 in 1 billion to be able to comprehend the numbering system. And it changed twice a day. 6 o'clock in the morning, German time, 12 o'clock noon. 6 o'clock in the morning, 12 o'clock noon. The codes were all changed on that Enigma machine constantly. 1 in a billion. Hitler totally satisfied that it would never be cracked. Well, a young man by the name of Alan Turing, a genius, played chess once with 25 people at the same time. If you ever played chess, I have trouble playing chess with one person, let alone 25 people at the same time. He worked and worked. He devised a machine called the Bombay machine. Fortunately, it was 25 feet long and 10 feet high. It's huge. If I can jump ahead, probably someday they'll call that a computer. And he devised this machine. But he needed something to put into it, to feed into it, that we could begin to crack the German messages. Well, he was at a pub, what do they call those? And a bar. And they were drinking English beer. And he started talking to a young lady who was a wren. And every day she would decipher these German messages. She could speak fluent German. And he talked to her. He said, "Is there anything you can give me? Anything in these messages in German that I could feed into this machine, and the machine would pick it up and then be able to decipher other messages?" And she goes, "No, the only thing I can think of is every message ends with Heil Hitler." Got it. Heil Hitler. That's all he needed. To think that the German Enigma machine was broken with 2 German words, Heil Hitler. They ran back to his computer room. They typed in Heil Hitler. They watched the gadgets begin to go around and around and around. It took about 4 hours, and before long, the first message came across. The Luftwaffe in a field exercise. And the commander ended the message with Heil Hitler. And before long, another message came in, and then another message came in, and another message came in. And before long, everything that came out of Berlin, the Allies knew. We knew exactly when Adolf Hitler would brush his teeth or go potty. We knew when he went to bed and when he got up. We knew everything about Hermann Göring. We knew everything about everything that the High Command would send out. We also knew Field Marshal Rommel sent out a 40-page military description of the changes from Normandy to Calais. We had every word, every sentence, everything the Germans were doing, and we knew at that point that the ruse, the red herring, had worked. Thank God. Now, we have to cross the English Channel. I was the only one that could give the okay. Word was coming into me. General Eisenhower, casualties on D-Day would be anywhere from 12,000, possibly up to 15,000 men killed in the first 24 hours. So you've got to live with that. They have to cross 60 miles of open ocean, land on 300, 200-yard beaches, and the only thing that we could provide them with our Air Force, hopefully, is bomb that beach to the point where there's large craters that the soldiers could embark from their LCs, go right into those craters for cover. But guess what? We did the same thing that the Confederates did at Gettysburg, at Pickett's charge, and the artillery overshot. So when the Confederates lined up their cannons on Pickett's charge, they never even got close to the front lines of the Union, but they were killing cows, cattle, and horses behind the Union lines, and that's exactly what we did. We overshot. So when our men hit those beaches, there were no craters. Not one. Open for 100 or 200 yards when they hit those beaches. But I jumped ahead. 2 weeks before the invasion, I brought in our weatherman. He was a nervous lieutenant, jittery, always shaking, because he realized he had to give the right weather report for crossing the English Channel. Everything is coming down to weather. Weather. And if we could not go June the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, or 6th, we would have to postpone it for 3 months. Do you realize what that means? That means that by then the Germans would pick it up. The Germans would realize. They would realize, number one, that the Enigma code probably had been, broken, but because of all the spies in London, they would know what's going on. June the 1st came. I had to make the decision, do we go? My little weatherman came in, shaking, nervous, squinty eyes. He's been up all night trying to figure out the weather patterns. We can't go. June the 2nd, can't go. June the 3rd, can't go. June the 4th, can't go. June the 5th, maybe. So I gathered all of the high command there at Portsmouth. We sat down. Do we go on June the 5th? The little weatherman came in, scared to death. And you could see his voice shaking as he came over to me and said, General Eisenhower, we can't go. And I said, do you realize we only have one more day in that window of time, June the 6th? And I told him, go ahead and pray about it. I took him back a little bit. And he said, it's going to take more than prayer to change this weather pattern. And by late on June the 5th, weather started to break on the English Channel. We had about, he said, 20 hours of calm weather before it would hit again. So on the evening of June the 5th, 1944, I drove out to the 82nd Air Force Base, also the 101st where they were based, talked to the men. Most of the men their faces were blackened. Some of them even cut their hair like a mohawk haircut. Can you imagine meeting, if you were a German and you met that guy coming up over a hill with a mohawk haircut, face blackened? The average parachute and the supplies about 95 pounds on top of their weight. There were 25,340 of them that are going to be dropped behind enemy lines when I talked to them. And as I walked up and down the ranks talking to these men, I realized half of them would be dead in 6 hours. Do you understand, Press Corps? Half of them would be dead. I was sending them to their death. What did we talk about? Well, we talked about farming. My wife and I just bought a farmhouse in Gettysburg. I love going to Gettysburg. If you ever get a chance to come to America, you want to come to my farmhouse in Gettysburg. We talked about hogs. We talked about cattle. I met a dentist from New Jersey, a mechanic. I met a young kid who lied about his age, said he was 18, but he was only 17. Then I began to realize, going up and down the ranks of these paratroopers, the average age was 17, 18, 19 years old. Very few married. A few had girlfriends, and we'll see one here in a moment. Most of them will never live out their lives. They will be dead in 6 hours. Most of them will never make it out of the airplane. Most of them will be shot, especially around Calais, Saint-Calais, that church there. Most of them will be shot in the air before they even hit the ground. I said my goodbyes, and I turned, and my lieutenant that was with me said, "Well, General, you better get in the Jeep because nobody wants to see a 4-star general cry." I just had tears flowing down. It was awfully hard to send those men to their death, but it had to be. We went back, and there was nothing more I could do. I gave the signal to go. Approximately 176,000 men plus over 25,000 paratroopers now were activated and on their way. Somebody in the press corps said, "What did you do, General Eisenhower?" Well, I went back to my room and I read Zane Grey. I love Zane Grey Westerns, and smoked 4 packs of cigarettes. I got to break that chain of smoking someday. But I love Zane Grey. But there's nothing more I could do. 6 hours ago, I was the most powerful man on the earth. Now, I'm the least powerful man on the face of the earth. It's totally out of my hands. It's in the hands of God. I have something here I'd like to share with the press. As most of you know, a lot of our soldiers never had an opportunity to get off of the LCs, the landing crafts. Each landing craft contained 35 to 40 men, depending on the size of the LC. Numerous LCs were blown up by 88s even before they hit the beaches. We would lose 35, 40 men just like that, disintegrated. Stories have come into me of an LC that was next to one that was blown up. Body parts would be flown all over them. Their helmets, their uniforms would be covered with intestines, brains, blood, everything, all over them. You can imagine the psychological expressions that they would have. Every one of those men that hit the beaches that day were heroes. Before they left England, I ordered that what you're going to see here was given to all my soldiers. The first thing I gave them was this little brass plaque, and it carried a New Testament Bible. Every soldier involved, whether they were a paratrooper or infantry, received one of these. It was mandatory. Whether they were Jewish, Catholic, Muslim, made no difference. There are no, by the way, Jews, Muslims, or Catholics on the beaches. You understand that? Everyone received this. I found out later that this saved the lives of some soldiers because they placed it in their breast pocket. And at the end of the day, they realized there was a bullet that hit the brass plate, saved their lives. That information came to me on numerous times. This was one that was taken off a body. Everything you see here was taken off a body on Omaha Beach. The next one that was given to them, a prayer book for soldiers and sailors. I think this edition is, I'm trying to get the latest edition, 1941. So this was the 1941 edition given to all my soldiers. Here again, it didn't matter. It doesn't matter when you go into combat, whether you're Jewish or whether you're a Christian. The next one, strength for service, God and country. I think this edition here is, this was given to him December the 25th, 1943. And also it was sent to Henry. He was the soldier killed. And this was sent by his mother, and she sent a Mother's Day's message to her son. This is very emotional stuff. Another one given out, and this was how to understand French and make yourself understood in French. Obviously, they were going to be in French territory. Most of them could not speak French, but if they had this, they'd at least be able to have some understanding of where to go, what city, and so forth. And the last one was a pocket guide to France. And the most emotional one found on this body, and by the way, this is all real stuff here. This all came from a man killed on Omaha Beach, was a picture of his girlfriend. Now you have to remember, prior to the invasion, there was no communication. All of the soldiers involved in this invasion were placed, what you basically could say is in a concentration camp with barbed wire fences. Nobody could get outside of that barbed wire fence. What would happen if they would go to a bar and get drunk and start spilling the beans on the invasion, and there was a German spy in there? Everybody had to be contained. So this picture reached him the day that he was leaving. They opened up the gates. We marched out to our various points to cross the English Channel. And let me read what's on the back of this. I wanted to send you a Valentine. And remember, Valentine is always what? February the 14th. At that point, they were in the enclosed camps. But since it is too late, this will have to do. I just got them today and thought that you might like them. She sent this, of course, in February. He, of course, did not receive it until June, I think either June the 4th or June the 5th, before he went over. I don't know what happened to this young lady, but this happened over and over and over again. So to the press corps, what price freedom? Well, this flag. And I think that we would rather have the United States flag flying over our schools, hospitals, churches, and communities than this flag. I think we would all agree to that, although I know the press sometimes is not too respectful of our military. So in conclusion, before I have a few come up here maybe and share to the press corps, the invasion was successful. It took a while for us to break out of the beaches. We had over 12,000 casualties. That would be KIA, missing in action, and captured. We captured over 900 German prisoners, but fortunately we killed over 9,000 of them. A lot of our men went wild, and many of the German soldiers that surrendered, but they couldn't speak English. I found out later some of our soldiers shot them dead in their tracks. I have no problem with that, even though the Geneva Convention talks about surrender. But if I jump ahead, when they liberated Dachau, approximately 25 of the SS guards did not make it out quite as fast from Dachau as Patton's army came in to liberate Dachau, and General Patton gave the order to shoot them all. And they lined them up on a wall, and our American soldiers killed every one of them. The ones that they didn't want to kill, they turned over to the inmates. I'd rather have been shot than turned over to the inmates. I reprimanded Patton. The Joint Chiefs of Staff wanted me to court-martial Patton for that decision at Dachau, and somehow it just got lost in the paperwork. Nothing more was done to it. You have to realize war is war, and sometimes men get really, the adrenaline gets going, and things happen. So, press corps, we were successful, and you can be thankful to God that you speak English and not German or not Japanese. But it's because of men like this man here, and the loss of this, and her loss. Multiply that by thousands upon thousands of women that lost their men, husbands, boyfriends, sons, brothers, in the war. And one final thought. There's a town, and I can't think of the name now, in Virginia. I wish I could think of that name now. The whole town in 1940, at 41, after Pearl Harbor was bombed, hundreds of young men volunteered for the Army. On D-Day, that town lost 28 men. Do you understand what I just said? On D-Day, many of them never made it off of the LCs. 28 of their men in that town. It'd be like, let's think of a town like Ashland, Ohio. And Ashland, Ohio lost 28 of its young men. Think about the messages coming in 3 or 4 months later that your son or your husband or your brother will not be coming back. And that's what happened in this town. I'm trying to think of the name, but I can't. 28. Many of them killed within 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Never left the LC. 5 minutes. But we can be thankful we were successful. Now, let's get to Paris. And once we get to Paris, hopefully the war will be over by Christmas. I'm hoping. You don't know about war, things happen. But we can be thankful. So at this time, I'm going to have a few come up and we can have some questions. We got a reporter here from London. He's got his Scottish hat on. He's from Scotland, probably. Come on up. We have a Wren with us here who worked with Alan Turing at Bleachy Field. And let's all get together and get our picture taken here, okay? I'm going to be with the Wren. I like Wrens because they're smart. And they also help decipher the Enigma code. So, the reporter from Scotland, do you have any questions that you want to ask of the professionals?
What year was the Enigma code broke, and how did that change the war?
Initially, they started deciphering the Enigma code as such in 1940. 1941, they started making inroads into that, but it wasn't until the end of 1941 into 1942 that Alan Turing went to the bar, talked to this Wren who interpreted German messages, and by those 2 words, Heil Hitler, took that back to his machine, plugged it in, and because of those 2 words, Heil Hitler, the Enigma machine was, the Enigma coding was broken, and then from that point on, every message sent out from Berlin or wherever it was to the Wehrmacht or the Luftwaffe or to the Waffen-SS would be intercepted by Wrens and interpreted, and we would know exactly what the Germans were up to. It probably shortened the war by 2 years, maybe more.
I know I had talked with you earlier, so they knew everything that was happening, so that they have to let certain things go through, so they didn't know that the Enigma code was broken. Sorry, I can't speak.
It's okay. Yes, and I talked to the Wrens about this, and they're the ones. Some of the Wrens had to make the decision, but they all knew that we could not protect every fleet in the ocean, even though we knew that a U-boat was going to sink it. And we might know that 2 or 3 days before because of breaking the codes. But if they would go ahead and relay that information to every ship coming into England, Germany eventually would go, hey, there's something going on here. You know, all these ships are changing course or they're not going where they should go. And so the Wrens and their superiors had to make a decision who lives and who doesn't. And it was a hard decision to make, but we could not let the Germans know that the Enigma code was broken.
the dress. Is there a story behind that dress, or is that the official dress that was, or one just like it that was used during the...
This dress is 1942. Okay, and I don't know the other dress, but if you notice the colors, women liked that was a very important color back in the 1940s.
Now I have one question for the teacher. How is
She's a Wren.
A Wren. Okay, I'll just say the Wren then. How is it for the students to enjoy the first person history lesson like this?
Well, for me, I think it brings it to life, brings history to life. Anybody can just read a book and try to retain it. But when you get a physical picture, we tend to remember things that we see. We're a lot of us more visual than we think we are. And so when we continually hear things, like we did at the conference today, it brings things to light for us. And then there might be a word or a phrase he said or something that he showed us that when we hear it again, our brain goes to that moment and brings back the story that we heard.
Well, thank you. That's all I have.
Well, one more thing. Everything up here was taken off of a young man's body. It was given to me personally by the family that was killed on Omaha Beach. So all of this means a lot to me. To know, that this individual with this girlfriend sacrificed his life so that we have our freedoms. Any other thoughts anybody would have?
As I said, the only thing I'd say is when it came to the breaking the Enigma codes, they didn't go just to anybody. Like me breaking the Enigma code, I wouldn't go to all the other people and share information of what I had learned. I was only instructed to share it with certain people that were part of it. Because when you make the decision of, yes, we're gonna go ahead and ignore this one, or yes, we're gonna go ahead and act on this one and let our ships know, you had to be very careful because a lot of people might have a brother or a husband or something that was involved in this. And so you didn't wanna have emotion play into it of, okay, my best friend's husband is on this boat that we know, and I can't tell her what we're gonna do, that we're gonna ignore the orders for this and he's gonna die. So you'd have to carry that with you.
Thank you.
Very good. All right.